On the morning of Tuesday, November 11th, 2024, just after 10 a.m., Birmingham Airport looked and sounded exactly as it always did. Long-haul flights touched down, cabin doors opened, and tired passengers shuffled toward passport control. In the arrivals hall, families craned their necks for a first glimpse of loved ones. Suitcases thudded onto conveyor belts, and trolleys rattled toward the exits in a steady, harmless stream. It was the kind of ordinary morning no one remembers until something goes very, very wrong. Because hidden in that sea of travelers were three very different criminals, each convinced they could slip through the system unnoticed. A mother who turned her own children into soldiers in a drug empire, a dealer whose arrogance or laziness left a trail straight back to his front door, and a man so calm he believed he could wheel a small fortune in heroin past border officers with barely a second glance. This is the story of their downfall, and how one airport revealed the darker trade flowing beneath the surface of Britain's borders. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Today, we start with the woman who hid a global drug network behind the mask of a normal family life, 54-year-old mother and grandmother, Farzana Kawsa from Bradford. On the surface, there was nothing remarkable about Farzana Kawsa. At 54, living in Bradford, she seemed every bit the ordinary mother and grandmother. Neighbors saw a woman busy with family life, juggling household responsibilities, raising children, helping with grandkids. To anyone looking in from the outside, she was just another parent trying to hold a family together. But behind that quiet facade, Farzana was building something very different. Away from school runs and family dinners, she was the linchpin of an international drug trafficking network worth millions. Investigators would later describe her not as a passive participant, but as the organizer, a woman who directed shipments of high-purity cocaine from Mexico to the United Kingdom, and did it with the cold, methodical thinking of a seasoned criminal. She was not working alone. Court evidence revealed that Farzana had cultivated contacts overseas, including a shadowy figure in Pakistan known only as Uncle. He was not a relative in the sentimental sense, but a key facilitator, someone who could arrange shipments, open doors, and connect her to corrupt insiders capable of loading suitcases in Cancun with kilos of cocaine. Together, they devised a system that, at first glance, looked like nothing more than well-timed family holidays and short breaks abroad. The most disturbing part of that system was how personal it was. Many crime bosses do everything they can to shield their loved ones from the line of fire. Farzana did the opposite. She turned her family into a workforce. Her eldest son, 33-year-old June Shafak, acted as her right hand. He helped coordinate travel, oversaw operations, and became a natural extension of his mother's authority. When she gave instructions, he helped make sure they were carried out. Then there was 28-year-old Muhammad Amir Shafak, trusted as a courier. He was involved in the luggage runs, physically moving the bags that, on paper, belonged to no one and yet were worth a fortune. At 22, Muhammad joined the operation at an age when most people are only just starting careers, thinking about their first home, or planning the next step in life. Instead, he was stepping into a conspiracy that could, and did, cost him his freedom. The youngest son, Hamza Shafek, was just 17 at the time the smuggling was underway. Legally still a minor, he was pulled into a world he should never have been near. By obeying his mother, he was not just being a dutiful son, he was irreversibly altering the course of his life. Farzana did not stop at her children. Her daughter-in-law, 27-year-old Majid Hussein, was drawn into the plot, expected to become part of the wider operation rather than protected from it. And her 19-year-old daughter, Safa, became one of the youngest couriers in the network, a teenager walking through airports carrying suitcases that contained more than most people earn in years. Outside the bloodline, family friend 36-year-old Khaled Abdul Kawi completed the inner circle, a trusted associate willing to take his place in this destructive hierarchy. This was not a loose, informal arrangement. It was a structured criminal enterprise. With Farzana at the top, she orchestrated movements, gave orders, and relied on her family's loyalty to keep the machine running. For them, loyalty to their mother meant sacrificing their futures. For her, it meant extending her reach under the perfect cover, the appearance of ordinary family travel. The key to the conspiracy lay in making crime look like routine. On paper, the family's trips appeared to be quick getaways to places like Dublin or Amsterdam. In reality, each booking, each ticket, and each landing time was calculated to intersect with one very specific stream of luggage: flights arriving from Cancun, Mexico. What Farzana and her uncle contact had designed was simple: repeatable, and for a while effective. But as their confidence grew, so did their visibility. And at Birmingham Airport, investigators had started to notice that this family's travel patterns were anything but random. The brilliance of Farzana's operation lay in how ordinary it looked. Nothing about the routine would have raised suspicion for the casual observer. Members of the family booked what appeared to be short city breaks to popular destinations like Dublin and Amsterdam. They often travelled light, sometimes with no checked luggage at all, giving the impression of quick, inexpensive trips abroad. But these flights were never chosen at random. Their outward journeys were almost irrelevant. The real heart of the plan was the timing of the return legs. Farzana's couriers made sure their flights back to Birmingham landed just as a long-haul flight from Cancun, Mexico was due to arrive. That was not coincidence. It was calculation. In the baggage hall, it created the perfect overlap, passengers from a short-haul European flight mixing with those from a long-haul Mexican one, all converging around the same carousel area, all tired, all in a hurry to get home. In Cancun, a corrupt insider had done their part. Suitcases had already been checked onto the Birmingham-bound flight, packed not with clothes and holiday souvenirs, but with blocks of high-purity cocaine. These bags had no legitimate owner waiting at arrivals. They were ghosts on the system luggage that would appear on the carousel and, in theory, could vanish just as quietly. That was where the family came in. Once in Birmingham's baggage hall, Farzana's couriers did not rush, did not panic, and did not act like people stealing anything. They simply drifted toward the carousel, serving the Cancun flight. When the preloaded suitcases appeared, they pulled them off the belt, set them on trolleys, and walked away, blending into the crowd of travelers collecting their own bags. No false bottoms, no secret compartments, no elaborate concealment, just the audacity to lift unaccompanied cases and pretend they were theirs. To the untrained eye, it was genius in its simplicity. For a while, it worked. Reports later suggested that this method had been used in international trafficking before, and Farzana's crew managed to repeat it multiple times. Between August and November 2024, investigators believe the network successfully carried out at least 5 smuggling runs, each one executed with the same cold precision. But while the family acted like nobody was watching, someone was. By November 11, 2024, the National Crime Agency and airport security teams had pieced together a troubling pattern. Passenger names, flight combinations, return timings. When laid out side by side, they no longer looked like spontaneous mini-breaks. They looked like a timetable. On that Tuesday morning, officers took up positions around Birmingham Airport. They were not guessing anymore, they were waiting. As the long-haul flight from Cancun landed, members of Farzana's group slipped into the baggage reclaim area, trying to disappear in plain sight. CCTV would later show them standing calmly by the Mexico carousel, not rushing, not drawing attention, just waiting for bags that, officially, were not theirs. 6 suitcases came off that flight, each one loaded with multi-kilo blocks of cocaine. The couriers lifted them from the belt and began wheeling them through arrivals, across the terminal, and out onto the forecourt, pushing trolleys and dragging bags like hundreds of other passengers do every day. For them, it must have felt like yet another successful run. Then, in the airport car park, the illusion shattered. As the group began loading the luggage into waiting cars, National Crime Agency officers moved in. Within moments, 6 suspects were surrounded and arrested. All 6 suitcases were seized before a single one left the airport grounds. Inside those cases, investigators discovered around 180 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, compressed into blocks and tightly wrapped for distribution. On the wholesale market, the haul was estimated at roughly £5 million. Broken down into street deals, it could have been worth around £14.4 million. Photographs later released by prosecutors showed the packages stacked together as stark, clinical image of what this family had gambled their futures on. For the NCA, this was more than a big bust. It was the dismantling of a family-led trafficking pipeline, a system that had turned everyday airport routines into a conveyor belt of narcotics. But Birmingham Airport had more stories to tell. Before we return to the fate of the Causa family in court, another case from the same airport reveals how a single careless mistake can bring down an entirely different kind of criminal empire. February 2016, same airport, different story. At Birmingham Airport's departure gates, security staff were going through what they do dozens of times a day, routine inspections. Passengers queued with passports and boarding passes in hand. Trays clattered along the X-ray belts, and most people were only worried about making their flight on time. Among them was a man called Majid Hussein, preparing to board a flight to Pakistan. He did not look like someone about to lose everything. To staff, he was just another traveler with hand luggage and a destination. But when his bag was searched, what they found was enough to change the course of his life. Inside his carry-on, officers discovered a wrap of heroin. What struck investigators later was not just that he had drugs, but how he would carry them. No hidden compartment, no elaborate disguise, no layers of packaging intended to outsmart scanners. The heroin was simply in his hand luggage, a basic and almost lazy attempt to get contraband through security. That tiny decision turned a minor find into the beginning of a much bigger storm. Airport staff immediately raised the alarm. Hussein was detained on the spot, moved away from the stream of passengers who continued onto their gates. Unaware that a different kind of journey had just begun behind the scenes, officers quickly realized this probably was not a one-off or the stash of a casual user. The combination of his behavior and the presence of heroin at the airport triggered suspicions that he was part of something bigger, something organized. Within hours, the investigation left the airport and followed Hussein home. Armed with warrants, officers headed to his address on Nansen Road in Salt Lake. What started as an arrest over a single wrap of heroin was about to unravel into the exposure of a serious drug and weapons operation. Inside the property, the focus soon turned to Hussein's bedroom. Hidden under his bed was a suitcase that told the real story. Inside, police found 1 kilo of heroin and 4 kilos of cocaine, together carrying an estimated street value of around £250,000. That alone confirmed their suspicions. The tiny wrap at the airport was just a loose thread. Hussein was not dabbling, he was distributing, and the drugs were only half the picture. In the same house, officers uncovered an arsenal that showed just how dangerous Hussein really was. There was a semi-automatic handgun, fully capable of killing, alongside 27 rounds of live ammunition, ready to be used. They also seized a stun gun, disguised as a mobile phone, an everyday object turned into a concealed weapon designed to incapacitate someone. Before they had time to react, an air pistol was recovered as well, adding to the list of tools he could use to threaten, intimidate, or enforce. Then there was the money. Hidden away in the property, police found around £300,000 in cash. Bundles of notes, stacked and stashed, represented years of profit from a trade built on addiction, exploitation, and fear. For investigators, those bundles told a clear story. This was not a desperate man scraping by. This was a well-financed player in Birmingham's drug market. The image of the unlucky passenger caught with a single wrap at the airport collapsed completely. In its place was the profile of a serious dealer, armed, organized, and prepared to protect his business. When Hussein's case reached Birmingham Crown Court in August 2016, prosecutors laid out the full scale of his crimes. He chose to plead guilty on the opening day, avoiding a drawn-out trial but unable to escape the weight of the evidence. The charges included possession of a prohibited firearm, possession of a disguised firearm, possession of ammunition, possession of class, drugs with intent to supply, and possession of criminal property. Judge Patrick Thomas QC did not mince his words. He described the combination of firearms and drugs as a toxic mix, a pairing that fuels violence, fear, and devastation in communities. Hussein was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but even that was not the end. Investigators from West Midlands Police pursued him through the Proceeds of Crime Act, determined to strip away the profits of his criminal life. In December 2017, the court ruled that he had illegally benefited by hundreds of thousands of pounds and ordered him to repay £295,000 within 3 months, or face an additional 3 years in prison on top of his 12-year sentence. A further £33,000 in criminal benefit was left outstanding to be recovered if more assets were ever uncovered. Majid Hussein's empire did not fall because of a complex sting or an undercover operation. It fell because of one careless decision at an airport gate. And yet, as damaging as his case was, another smuggler passing through Birmingham Airport would soon attempt something far bolder, walking calmly off a flight with nearly 18 kilos of heroin in his luggage, guided in real time by a handler thousands of miles away. November 2021. Once again, Birmingham Airport looked unremarkable. Passengers from around the world flowed through its corridors, some bleary-eyed from overnight flights, Others weighed down with duty-free bags and souvenirs. Among them was 35-year-old Muhammad Uzziah Rashid from Oldham in Greater Manchester. He had just arrived on a flight from Sialkot in Pakistan via Dubai. On the surface, he was the picture of normality, just another man returning from a trip abroad. But Rashid was not just carrying clothes and toiletries. Border Force officers selected him for a check and directed him into a secondary search area. It is a moment most travelers dread, even when they have done nothing wrong. Rashid, however, had every reason to be afraid. Hidden inside his checked-in luggage was a consignment of heroin that would leave investigators stunned. As officers opened his bags and began to search, what they found was not a small stash or a user's supply. They uncovered tightly wrapped packages, almost 18 kilograms of heroin in total. When forensic analysis was carried out, the drugs were found to be of exceptionally high purity, between 66% and 71%, on the streets, once cut and sold in smaller deals. That haul was worth in excess of £900,000. Yet what really lingered in investigators' minds was not just the scale, but Rashid's demeanor. CCTV, later released by the National Crime Agency, showed him moving through the terminal in a calm, unhurried manner. No obvious panic, no wild-eyed glances at security. No rushed movements to betray the weight of what he was carrying. He pushed his luggage like any other passenger, the kind of quiet composure that traffickers count on to slip beneath suspicion. When confronted with the drugs in his luggage, Rashid's first instinct was to distance himself from them entirely. He claimed the bags were not his. When that story began to crumble under basic checks, boarding records, baggage tags, travel documents, he shifted his explanation. Now, he insisted the drugs must have been planted without his knowledge. It was a familiar defense, the idea of being an innocent courier, a man who had no idea what was in his own suitcase. But the truth was sitting in the palm of his hand. When officers examined his mobile phone, the real story emerged. Among everyday chats and contacts was a WhatsApp conversation with a contact, listed only as brother, a man based in Pakistan, who appeared to be acting as Rashid's handler. The messages showed that Rashid was not traveling alone in spirit. At every stage of his journey, someone was watching, guiding, and reassuring him from afar. One message stood out. As Rashid grew anxious about passing through security, brother responded with a line meant to steady his nerves: "Remain tension-free. God will be generous." Simple words, but chilling in context. It was more than comfort, it was instruction. A reminder to walk normally, hold his nerve, and trust that their plan would succeed. For the NCA, that WhatsApp thread was gold. It showed that this was not the story of an innocent man tricked into carrying drugs. It exposed Rashid as a willing courier, plugged into a larger professional supply chain. Flights had been financed, routes plotted, handlers assigned. Rashid was one link in a chain, stretching from Pakistan to Britain, with Birmingham Airport as one of its key entry points. By May 2022, the illusion of innocence was gone. Rashid appeared at Birmingham Crown Court and pleaded guilty to the importation of class of drugs. His admission spared him a full trial, but it did not spare him the consequences. For attempting to bring almost 18 kilos of high-purity heroin into the UK, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. His case became another warning held up by the National Crime Agency. No matter how calm you look, no matter how carefully you are guided from abroad, the promise of fast money almost always ends the same way: handcuffs, a prison van, and years lost behind bars. And as officers and courts dealt with Rashid, the fallout from that November 2024 bust at Birmingham Airport was still moving through the justice system. The Bradford family, who had treated international drug trafficking like a twisted family business, were about to hear exactly what their loyalty to Farzana Khalsa would cost them. By the time the Bradford family stood in the dock at Birmingham Crown Court in late 2024, the story that began as just another morning at Birmingham Airport had become something far more disturbing. This was not a faceless cartel. It was a mother, her children, her daughter-in-law, and a trusted family friend, all woven into an international drug pipeline that had used family holidays as camouflage. At the center of it all was 54-year-old Farzana Khalsa. Prosecutors presented her as the architect, the one who liaised with contacts abroad, coordinated travel, and turned airport arrivals into stages for criminal handovers. The court agreed. Farzana was identified as the ringleader of the operation, the person who had not only orchestrated the smuggling runs, but had made the devastating decision to pull her own children into crime. For that, she was sentenced to 13 years and 4 months in prison. Her eldest son, 33-year-old June Shafak, who had acted as her second-in-command, handling logistics, helping to coordinate flights, and standing shoulder to shoulder with her in the conspiracy, received 10 years and 9 months. Matching that term was 36-year-old family friend and associate, Khaled Abdul Kawi. Though not related by blood, he had become part of the inner circle, and the court treated him as a key player, not a peripheral helper. 28-year-old Muhammad Amir Shafak, who had played the role of courier and helped move the suitcases that arrived preloaded from Cancun, was sentenced to 8 years and 9 months. Just behind him, 22-year-old Ume Muhammad received 8 years and 1 month, a young man at the very start of adulthood, now facing nearly a decade behind bars. Then there were the youngest, Safa, only 19 at the time she was drawn into her mother's operation and used as a courier, was jailed for 7 years and 2 months. Her sentence underlined a brutal truth. Youth did not shield her from responsibility, and family loyalty did not count as a defense. As for the youngest son, Hamza, he occupied a particularly troubling place in the story. He was just 17 when the smuggling runs were taking place, still legally a minor. Because of his age at the time of the offences, his case was handled separately from the main trial. By the time he came before the court, he had turned 18, standing not as a boy led astray, but as an adult facing the consequences of choices made under his mother's instruction. According to the Crown Prosecution Service, his sentencing was scheduled for October 2025, and at the time of reporting, the final decision on his fate had not yet been delivered. Not everyone in the family received an immediate custodial term. 27-year-old daughter-in-law, Sarah Hussein, was handed a 2-year sentence, suspended for 2 years. The court recognized her involvement, but also treated her differently to those more deeply embedded in the network. A suspended sentence meant she would not go straight to prison unless she re-offended, a second chance shadowed by the knowledge of how close she had come to losing her freedom entirely. Taken together, the sentences painted a stark picture: an entire family unit fractured and scattered into different wings of the prison system because one woman chose power and profit over protection and care. And when we step back and look at all three cases, the family-run cocaine pipeline, the armed dealer whose empire collapsed over a single wrap of heroin in a carry-on bag, and the calm courier walking through arrivals with nearly 18 kilos of heroin, while a handler whispered reassurances from another continent, a pattern emerges. Birmingham Airport, a place most of us associate with holidays and homecomings, has also become a front line in the battle against organized crime. Every suitcase has a story. Some are packed with clothes and souvenirs. Others, as these cases show, are filled with poison, weapons, and the fallout of greed. What do you think about these sentences? Were they fair, too harsh, or not nearly enough for the damage these networks cause? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown insightful, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss our next case here on UK Crime Documentaries. There are many more stories hidden in the routine moments of everyday life, and we will be here to uncover them.